It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, I got a story here over at conduitnews.com. We covered it briefly yesterday. Welcome back to the program, by the way. Headline, State Rep files legislation to manage microchipping. Pretty interesting stuff here. A lot of people have talked about this for a while. The representative is State Representative Stephen Meeks. He's from District 67. Stephen, welcome back to the program, sir.
Good morning.
Tell us about it. It's House Bill 1177. What made you want to do this?
Sure. First off, I appreciate you having me on this morning because you can imagine I've received a lot of emails and calls about this over the weekend, and people are wanting to know why I'm trying to bring microchipping to Arkansas. One lady called and read me the riot act. She said that she wasn't cattle or livestock and didn't know why I'm trying to microchip people. And so I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Hang on a second. So people have read the headlines and they think that you're in favor of microchipping?
Yes.
Wild.
And
Okay.
Yeah, and I've had people say, well, I'm not getting microchipped. We need to microchip all the politicians first, since they're the ones trying to push this. And people, they hear a news story, they jump to conclusions, they have their own presuppositions, and, they're off to the races without even reading the bill or getting all the background. So I appreciate you, like I said, having me on so we can delve into this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, you have companies, and this is happening over in Europe. I think it's more frequently.
Right.
Companies are mandating that their employees be microchipped.
Right. So my interest in this is I chair the technology committee in the House, and so I am constantly reading technology news, looking for opportunities of how we can get ahead of the technology instead of always reacting to the technology. And about a year ago, I came across an article where thousands of people over in Sweden were getting these microchips. And it's something, we've always talked about, hey, we know this is coming, it's going to be somewhere in the future, but now it's starting to happen. And the way they're being used is instead of having a swipe card to get into a building or to access your computer, they insert these little microchips. And if you've not seen them, you can Google it, but they're about the size of a grain of sand, and it goes in the little webbing between your thumb and your first finger. And instead of having the swipe card, you just, swipe this little microchip, and it gives you access to the building, or even vending machines. And there's even some public transits now over in Sweden that you gain access by, getting one of these little microchips inserted. So you don't need your wallet or cash or tokens or, whatever you use for public transportation. You just use this. And then about, back in the summer, I read an article where a firm up in Wisconsin had started doing this for their employees. And so I went to our staff and asked them to research, hey, is anybody doing anything to either look at this or to regulate this? Because, could an employer force an employee to accept one of these chips? What kind of data is being stored on it? What happens when the employee leaves? What happens if and nobody was doing anything? And so that was what prompted me to file the legislation. And essentially, in a nutshell, this is an employee protection bill. And it's also to get the conversation about where we as a state want to see this technology go, or even if we want this technology to come to the state of Arkansas. So what the bill does is there is actually 4 prongs. The first thing it does is it says that a company cannot force an employee to receive a microchip. An employee can reject it for any reason, whether it's privacy, religion, so on and so forth. So you reject it for any reason. If the employee decides that they do want to take the microchip, they actually have to sign an affidavit that says that they agree to this. And that affidavit should include what data is going to be kept on the chip. Usually it's just a number, but what data is going to be kept on the chip and what that data is going to be used for. And so when the employee signs off on that, they know what's going on and how the information is going to be used. And then on the flip side, it also creates a protection for the company because the company has that permission from the employee to proceed. If the employee wants the chip removed under the legislation, they can have it removed at any time for any reason, and it has to be removed within 30 days. When the employee leaves, again, either the employer has to remove it, or if the employee says, you know what, it's there, it's not causing a problem, I don't want to have someone yank it out, the employee can sign an affidavit and simply say, I waive the company of responsibility, and then at that point, the employee takes the responsibility going forward. Just because I wouldn't think it'd be right for, 20 years from now, an employee to come back to a company and say, hey, you put this in me 20 years ago, now you need to pay to take it out.
Yeah.
And so that in a nutshell is what it does. It's a very basic legislation that lays the foundation just to have at least some ground rules. Because let's say, this technology could come to Arkansas next week, or it could be, it could be 5 years from now. There's no telling on that. And I expect it's not going to be the large corporations. It's probably going to be like this firm in Wisconsin. It's a technology firm. They like to be on the cutting edge. They maybe have 50, 100, 120 employees. And this is something they want to try. And I suspect that's probably where it will start. And, you could easily see a situation where we start out voluntary, but we get, say, 95 out of 100 employees who have the chip, and you just have those 4 or 5 stragglers that are left, that the company now has to make special, rules and exemptions or whatnot, just to have the old swipe cards, the old passwords, and it becomes more and more cumbersome for the company. So they maybe start saying, hey, you guys need to do this. Just, you guys need to get on board with the program. And this bill is to prevent anything like that from happening.
It's wild stuff. We're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks. He's a state rep from District 67. He's got this bill, if you're just joining us, to manage the concept of microchipping employees. Now, let me just play devil's advocate here. So you're an employee. You're an employer, and you're saying, I want a microchip on my employees, and if you don't like it, you don't have to work here. So you talk a little bit about, there is, in this bill here, you are basically saying that the employer isn't going to have, the right to hire and fire who he wants to, right? Is that a stretch, or?
Essentially, first going into it, this is going to be an employee that you already have, and when you hired that employee, there was no decision about, the employee is not having to decide, do I want to work here based upon am I going to get microchipped or not.
Yeah.
But you're right. Essentially, the company gets it 5 years later down the road, and you're looking to hire a new employee. As it stands right now, they would be able to tell the employee, unless you're willing to be microchipped, you can't come to work here. And under this law, they wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Right. And that
So
that's and that is the give there, and it is a give. But I put myself.
You're right.
You put yourself in the. I don't want to be forced to be microchipped or be fired.
Right.
Right. But there are all these there are other behaviors that the employer still does have. You have to do this or you are fired. So this is. Talk a little bit about. Where does your end times eschatology philosophy come in here? Because let's just be honest here. A lot of people think in the book of Revelation, the mark of the beast has something to do with, not being able to buy and sell. Mm-hmm. And people look at these RFID chips being inserted into your skin as being a potential for some sort of one world government, financial system that is very oppressive to people who are Christians. So where does that come in here? If at all.
So I am a fellow believer here, so I do believe that that's coming. Now, this technology here is not mark of the beast. If you can imagine, I've gotten a lot of allusions to that as the story has spread. Now, do I believe this is precursor technology to that? Yes, I do. And, if I look into my crystal ball as to where do I think this is going, in the technology circles, there's something called the singularity, and the singularity is considered the time when there's a fusion between humans and computers, or humans and machines. And, Visa came out with a card this year that's one of those wireless contactless cards. So now if you want to buy something at the grocery store, instead of having to swipe your card, or, how many of us use cash anymore, this card, you just take it and you swipe it, or you take your phone and you swipe it. I could really easily see it being the next step. You get one of these microchips inserted, and like I said, they're doing this over in Sweden right now for mass transit, is you walk up to the, grocery, you walk up to the machine, and instead of handing cash or card, you just swipe your hand over this reader, and with the technology, you buy your groceries. So And there are a lot of advantages to this. You don't have to worry about it being lost and stolen. You don't have to worry about it get it at home. You don't have to worry about someone stealing your PIN number or stealing the microchip out of your hand. So there's a lot of safety, security, and conveniences that go along with it. And I could foresee a time, and who knows whether it's 20, 25, 30 years down the road, where the majority of people have these in their hand, and now all of a sudden it becomes more expensive for Visa to produce those little pieces of plastic that we now run around with.
Yeah.
And so you're left with, well, either you come along with this microchipping technology or, some version of it, or else you don't have access to these financial utilities tools anymore.
Yeah.
All of us can remember, was it 20 years ago? I remember there was a commercial on AT&T said that, hey, in the future you're going to be able to pick which movies you want, when you want to watch, and you can watch them online. Well, at that time it seemed so fanciful and far-fetched. Well, I bet by the end of the day most of us are going to go on, some sort of streaming service and watch on-demand movies, things that were, science fiction just 20 years ago.
Yeah, and when it happened, when that particular transition happened, it was almost overnight. It was crazy how it went from on demand just took off like crazy. Well, I'll tell you this. We're talking again with State Representative Stephen Meeks. I kind of foresee a future where you're going to have more and more people start to reject technology and be looked at kind of the way the Amish are looked at now.
Sure.
And the only reason I say that is, I look at my cell phone, and my cell phone's great. I can contact the people I want to contact, but I also know that this cell phone and this constant communication is changing the way I interact with people.
Sure.
It changes the way you interact with what you do professionally. It changes the way you interact with your family, and I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are around my age who really, they love their phones. They love the level of communication and technology that they have, but they do kind of fantasize sometimes about it all going away because they do realize that it has this draw that is just, it's kind of a sociological or human experiment that we really don't really know where things are going to end up. We've got kids that have these screens so young and they're not going to have any social skills and everything else. And so, as technology progresses, I can see a counterculture that kind of could possibly come out of it where people are actually rejecting technology, and those who reject the technology will actually be looked at negatively by society that is wanting to get to what you mentioned, this singularity and this fusion of biology with technology.
Sure. I don't disagree with that. And one of the other areas that I work on, that I actually did an interim study proposal this last summer on the subject of kids and screens. Is there should we in the state be limiting how much time kids spend in front of a computer at school, especially during their earlier years? Because you're right, a lot of those questions, they're unknown because we're the first generation to tackle these, and a lot of the decisions that we make will set the precedent for even future generations. So, I think you're exactly right. There's going to be a split off between those who want to continue to push the technology further and those who want to go back to a more simpler way of things.
So we're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks, his House Bill 1177 to manage the microchipping of Arkansas employees. So what do you think? You got any support for this down there? Are you going to run it anytime soon?
My hope is to try to run it this week. I've not talked to my colleagues a whole lot about it. I essentially just filed it kind of, I don't want to say clandestinely, but I just took it and filed it. And so one or two colleagues I've mentioned it to, they do seem to be supportive of the idea and the fact that we need to try to get ahead of this. And, if nothing else, it at least started a conversation that we as society need to have about where and what the appropriate use of this technology is going to be. And I've even had some people say that the bill doesn't go far enough and that we just need to ban it altogether.
Hey, well, that would, like you said, it is the part of the conversation. I mean, I think it makes a lot of people nervous. I mean, with the amount of, the amount of, like what you're talking about when the information that is recorded with the chip and what you do with that information. I mean, with what we're seeing they're doing with our information now, I mean, good grief. I mean, what does it monitor? Does it monitor your heart rate? Does it monitor your cholesterol? I mean, what is it? What else are these chips going to do?
Right. Yeah, the whole big brother syndrome, and I haven't talked about this a whole lot yet, but I have a companion bill that I'm working on where, a lot of companies, and even the state does this to its state employees, where if you don't smoke, you don't do this or that you get a discount on your health insurance. And some companies now, I've read, are offering these discounts if the employee will wear one of these, Fitbit or health trackers. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that stays voluntary, that we're not going to have companies that are going to go to the point where they're going to force their employees to wear health monitoring devices all the time that the company has access to in order to receive an employee discount.
So on that, this is a lot of this is, it's really weird because I'm part of the generation that remembers growing up and watching science fiction movies, and I mean you do too, Stephen. Think that it's far from the future, but it's here now. And what you just mentioned is there's this movie is very similar to this movie with Ewan McGregor, I think Scarlett Johansson, called The Island, where they measure his sodium intake by he went to the bathroom, and so they know his sodium's too high, so he can't have bacon, and he wants bacon, but he can't have bacon, and so is it far off? I don't know, but I do know this. In our own lifetime, the Obama administration and Congress said that you have to have insurance in order to be in good standing with your government, that you have to pay us a fee. And so, and then the Supreme Court said that was legal. So if that's legal, then is it not legal for at some point they mandate you have to have a certain amount of broccoli and you can't have bacon? I mean, and so I mean it's pretty nuts. I mean, we have the technology to enslave ourselves, and that's what we need to be made aware of. That we need to make sure that we don't allow the technology to enslave us. So
right, exactly. And some people have given me a hard time, but this stuff is not here. Why are we even bothering with it? Well, like you said, it could be here tomorrow, and it'll be here before we know it. And we better start having these conversations, or else we're going to reap the freaking cut. I don't want to get a phone call from a constituent next summer after the session's over saying my employer is trying to force me to do something like this that I have a religious objection to.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to lay the ground rules first than to come back and try to do fire damage after.
Yeah, that's called being left of bang. You don't want to be right of bang. You want to be left of the issue. Stephen Meeks, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, I'll see you at the Marble Palace. Folks.
Sounds good. You have a good day.
All righty. We got to take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in just a moment.